Well, hello and welcome to Naming in the AI Age. Last week, we talked about when a simple creative brief is all that you need. This week, we're going to dive a little deeper into what makes a detailed brief essential when the stakes are higher. If it's a basic brief, it's usually about clarity. A detailed one is usually more about strategy. Today, we're going to dig into what makes a creative brief truly powerful. Think naming architecture, brand personality, tone, long term fit. Whether you're a global product or you're rebranding and changing your brand's voice, this is where things really get sharp. Let's dive in.
Okay, now let's go back to the creative brief. When do you need a creative brief that's really thorough? And that's where you're pretty sophisticated. And we deal work, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 clients. They're spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in launching new names, new product names. Think automobiles, think pharmaceuticals. And they are extremely sophisticated, and have a great appetite for a very detailed brief that gets into lots of the nuts and bolts that we would probably never bring up to a mom and pop. So what are some of those things? Well, we talk about specifically what's the ask. So rather than what do you want the name to do, what specifically is the assignment, right? And that might go beyond just the name. It might get into naming architecture. It might get into name strategy or brand strategy. It might get into building a naming system. Who knows, right? But what's the ask? And then what's the opportunity, right? We try to understand and frame what is the opportunity that our client is taking advantage of. And then what must the new name embody? So not just what must the new name do, but what is the persona of the new name? What is the brand archetype that the new name might relate to? So when I talk about a persona, think about the name as an individual. What personality characteristics do you want it to embrace? Do you want it to be a very serious, professional, wizened expert? Or do you want it to be more fun and playful and exciting? Brand archetype is sort of like that. There are specific brand archetypes, like one brand archetype might be the hero who comes and saves the day. A different archetype might be the magician. There's just a little bit of sense of magic and wonder around that name. Another brand archetype might be the explorer, that is taking you on a journey, an odyssey. And there's a whole list of these you can Google, or you can use ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever to find a lot more information about. But that might be something else that you want to take a look at. And then when you think about what the name must embody, what is the essence of the name itself? Is there a theme? Is there a function? Is there a benefit? Is there a feature? Is there just a sound, like innovative, modern, exciting, fast? All those elements can go into the brief. And then we talk about specific naming themes, like what are the enduring benefits and qualities that you want the name to stand for today and to serve you well in the future. So this really gets into strategy and some deep thinking and often some research. We might talk about semantic approach, descriptive names versus enhanced descriptive names versus evocative names versus abstract names. I'm not going to get into all the details right now, but these are the kinds of conversations that I would never have necessarily with an unsophisticated mom and pop that just wants a good name, and to start talking about enhanced descriptive versus descriptive is just getting way down into the weeds for them that they don't need to hear about. Whereas a B2C client that's got, $100 million or more product launch, those can be very, very important conversations. And then the tonality of the name. You put the name on different yardsticks. Do you want a name that's more sophisticated, or do you want a name that's more straightforward? Do you want a name that's more trusted and grounded, or do you want a name that's more cutting edge and out there? Do you want a name that's more accessible and friendly and inviting, or do you want a name that's maybe very technology driven and maybe even a little bit intimidating, but because of that, there's a cool factor associated with, like, I don't know what that is. That's a little bit scary, but it's also exciting, right? So there are lots of those kinds of dimensions to go down. And then there's some standard parameters and some custom parameters when it gets to a name that are worked into the creative brief. A lot of the standard stuff's pretty obvious, easy to say, easy to spell, works in different languages, doesn't have trademark conflicts, isn't too abstract or too metaphorical. There might be some custom parameters that each client has with respect to particular targets and what's going to resonate with those targets. So that is a much more detailed creative brief, but it's very important to do that if you have a client or if you are a brand manager at a company that has the appetite and the need for that level of detail. And it will make the creative process much richer, both for the human team that we use, or the human team you might use, and then however you want to prompt AI to facilitate and assist as you go. So that's a little bit about the creative brief and why in some cases you maybe don't need it, but in many cases you do. And even when you do need it, you need to really think about, well, what kind of brief do I need, right? How detailed does it need to be? But in general, I think the more detailed, the better. Even if you don't necessarily show all that to the client, it does help ideation. It does help coming back with a richer set of names that really have the kind of potential, differentiate, and develop that kind of immediate attention-grabbing aspect to it that you're after. Talk to you again next week. See ya.